The alien princess stood firm. Our families chose this union. Part 1. The Grand Council chamber of the Empire stretched upward like a cathedral made of living crystal. Light from 3 distant suns filtered through the translucent walls, casting rainbows across the assembled nobles who stood in silent judgment. Princess walked to the center of the chamber, her silver robes trailing behind her like liquid metal. She held her head high, even as she felt the weight of 1,000 disapproving eyes upon her. Her father, Emperor, sat upon the ancient throne carved from a meteorite that had fallen on their world 10,000 years ago. His face betrayed nothing, but knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. He had arranged this meeting at her request, and now she would have to face the consequences of her announcement. Daniel Carter stood near the far wall, wearing the formal uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. He was tall for a human, with brown hair cut short and eyes the color of a calm ocean. He had been on Prime for 6 months now, working to establish trade agreements between their 2 civilizations. In that time, had watched him navigate their complex politics with patience and quiet intelligence. She had not expected to feel anything for him. She had been wrong. Raised her hand, and the murmuring among the nobles fell silent. She took a breath and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. I stand before you today to confirm the arrangement made between our house and the human delegation. I will honor the political marriage that our families have agreed upon. I will take Daniel Carter as my partner. The silence lasted for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the chamber erupted. Noble houses that had feuded for centuries found themselves united in their outrage. Voices overlapped as accusations flew through the air like weapons. Stood firm as the storm of words crashed against her. She had expected this reaction. She had prepared for it. Her brother Prince pushed through the crowd to stand before her. He was taller than, with the same silver hair and violet eyes that marked their royal bloodline. But where his expression was calm, his face twisted with barely contained fury. "You cannot be serious," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "A human. These creatures live barely a century. Their bodies are fragile. Their minds cannot even touch the psychic currents that connect our people, and you would bind yourself to one of them." Met her brother's gaze without flinching. I will. "This is an insult to our ancestors," continued, turning to address the crowd. "Our bloodline stretches back 50,000 years. We have ruled this empire through wars and plagues and the death of stars themselves. And now our princess wishes to dilute that heritage with the blood of primitives who discovered space travel only 3 centuries ago." A wave of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles. Saw Daniel watching from his position near the wall. His expression remained calm, but she could see his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He understood every word being said about him. He felt every insult, and yet he stood there with dignity, refusing to react. That was the moment knew she had made the right choice. "Our families chose this union," said, her voice rising above the noise. The chamber fell silent again, not from respect but from shock at her defiance. "My father, the Emperor, saw wisdom in strengthening our bond with humanity. The humans offer us something valuable in return for this alliance. They offer us access to their medical research, their unique perspective on problems we have struggled with for. And yes, they offer us their friendship." Friendship spat the word like a curse. "We do not need friends, we need subjects. We need resources, we need power. Humans have none of these things to offer us." "Then you have not been paying attention," brother stepped closer to, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I have studied them. I have walked among them on their world. They are not what you think. There is something in them that we have lost, a fire that burns despite everything that should extinguish it. I will not turn my back on that." Emperor finally spoke, his deep voice silencing all other sounds in the chamber. "My daughter has made her position clear. The arrangement stands. However, tradition must be observed." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembly. The human Daniel Carter must prove himself worthy through the ancient bonding trials. If he succeeds, the marriage will proceed. If he fails, the arrangement will be dissolved. The nobles nodded among themselves. The bonding trials were brutal tests that had been used for thousands of years to evaluate potential partners for the royal family. Many had entered those trials. Few had emerged alive. Daniel stepped forward and the crowd parted around him like water around a stone. He walked to stand beside, facing the emperor. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "I accept the trials." Laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "You accept your own death, human. The trials were designed for our kind. Your weak body will break long before you complete even the first challenge." Daniel turned to look at the prince. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet determination that had come to recognize during his time on their world. "I have faced long odds before," Daniel said simply. "I am still here." The assembly was dismissed, and the nobles filed out of the chamber in groups, already whispering about what they had witnessed. Soon only Daniel and a handful of guards remained. Approached Daniel, studying his face for any sign of the fear he must be feeling. She found none. "You understand what you have agreed to," she said. "The bonding trials have killed species far stronger than humans. The trial of endurance alone has claimed the lives of warriors who trained their entire lives for it." Daniel nodded slowly. "Your ambassador explained the basics when this arrangement was first proposed. I know what I signed up for." "And yet you agreed anyway. Why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Earth needs this alliance. The medical technology your people can provide will save millions of lives back home. Children who would have died from diseases we cannot cure will grow up and have families of their own." He paused, and something softened in his expression. "And I have come to believe that this union could be more than just politics, if you are willing to give it a chance." Felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had not expected to feel. She had agreed to this marriage out of duty to her father and her empire. But standing here with this human who was willing to risk death for his people, and for her, she began to think that duty might not be the only reason she would see this through. "The trials begin at dawn," she said. "You should rest. You will need your strength." Daniel smiled, a small expression that transformed his serious face into something almost handsome. "I have faced worse odds back home. Do not worry about me, princess." Watched him walk away, escorted by guards to his quarters. She did not know if he would survive what was coming, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would stand firm in her choice, no matter what anyone said. The alien princess stood firm. "Our families chose this union." Part 2. The desert stretched before them like an ocean of red sand and black stone. Twin suns hung low on the horizon, their combined heat turning the air into something that felt almost solid. Daniel Carter stood at the starting line of the trial of endurance, wearing only the simple cloth garments that tradition allowed. Beside him, Princess wore the same, her silver hair tied back and her violet eyes scanning the wasteland ahead. A priest stood before them, ancient and withered, his voice carrying across the barren proving grounds. "The trial of endurance tests the body and the spirit. You must cross the desert of sorrows and reach the temple of dawn before the third sunrise. You may carry only what you can hold in your hands. You may drink only what you find. You will face the creatures of this land and the cruelty of its climate. Only those who are truly worthy will survive." Daniel glanced at. She gave him a small nod, her expression unreadable. He had spent the night studying what little information Earth's archives held about biology and geography. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. What he did not know was that Prince had visited the priests the night before. He had paid them handsomely to release additional predators into the desert. He had bribed the weather controllers to intensify the heat. He had done everything in his power to ensure that the human would not survive. The horn sounded, and they began to walk. For the first day, things went smoothly. Daniel kept pace with, his longer legs compensating for her natural endurance. They found a small spring hidden in a cave and drank deeply before continuing. They spoke little, saving their energy for the journey ahead. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Daniel had expected this from his research, and he guided them to a sheltered spot between two large rocks that would retain the day's heat. Watched him with curiosity as he arranged their resting place with practiced efficiency. "You have done this before," she said. "Survived in harsh places." Daniel nodded, settling against the warm stone. "I grew up in the American Southwest, desert country. My grandmother used to take me camping when I was young. She taught me how to read the land, find water, avoid the dangerous creatures." He smiled at the memory. She was a nurse who worked in remote areas. She believed everyone should know how to survive when things go wrong. "She sounds wise." She was. She passed away a few years ago, but her lessons stayed with me. They slept in shifts, taking turns watching for predators. When dawn came, they continued their march across the endless red sand. The second day brought trouble. They were crossing a rocky canyon when the creature struck. It came from above, a serpentine thing with scales like mirrors and fangs that dripped with venom. It was twice the size of anything Daniel had seen in the research files, and he realized instantly that something was wrong. This creature should not have been here. Reacted first, pushing Daniel aside as the beast lunged. Her movement saved his life, but it cost her. The creature's fangs caught her arm, sinking deep into her flesh before she could pull away. She screamed, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls, and the creature retreated into the shadows to wait for its venom to do its work. Daniel caught as she fell. Her skin was already turning gray around the wound, and he could see the poison spreading through her veins like black lightning. "Leave me," gasped, her voice weak. "The trial only requires one survivor to pass. You can still complete it. You can still save the Alliance." Daniel looked at her, at this proud princess who had stood up to her entire civilization for him. He thought about the millions of lives back on Earth depending on this marriage. He thought about the logic of her words. Then he lifted her into his arms and started walking. "What are you doing?" demanded, though her voice was fatting. "You cannot carry me across the desert. You will die." "Maybe," Daniel agreed, "but I am not leaving you behind." The hours that followed were the hardest of Daniel's life. The twin suns beat down on him without mercy. The sand pulled at his feet with every step, grew heavier as her body fought against the poison, falling in and out of consciousness. But Daniel kept walking. As night fell again, he found a small oasis that his grandmother's training helped him recognize. He laid down and examined her wound. The poison had spread further and her breathing was shallow. She needed medicine that he did not have. But Daniel was not helpless. He remembered the lessons his grandmother had taught him about survival medicine. He remembered the plants she had shown him, the techniques she had demonstrated. He looked around the oasis and began to search. It took him 2 hours to find what he needed. A thick-leafed plant that grew near the water, similar to something his grandmother had used to treat snake bites back home. He could not be certain it would work on physiology, but he had no other choice. He crushed the leaves into a paste and applied it to his wound. Then he held her through the night, keeping her warm as her body fought against the poison. When dawn came, opened her eyes. "You are still here," she whispered, surprise evident in her weak voice. "I told you, I do not leave family behind." Stared at him, confusion mixing with something deeper in her violet eyes. "We are not family yet." Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion. "I am getting ahead of myself, I suppose." They reached the Temple of Dawn just as the third sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel was barely conscious, his body pushed far beyond its limits. But he was still carrying, refusing to put her down until they crossed the finish line together. The observers who waited at the temple could not believe what they were seeing. A human, one of the weakest species in the known galaxy, had completed the trial of endurance while carrying an injured partner. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. And yet there he stood, swaying on his feet but unbroken. Prince watched from a distance, his face a mask of fury. His sabotage had failed. The human had survived. Worse, he had proven himself in a way that even the most prejudiced noble could not ignore. As medical attendants rushed to help, she reached out and grabbed Daniel's hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were clear. "Why?" she asked again. "Why did you not save yourself?" Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his own exhaustion threatening to pull him into darkness. "Because where I come from, you do not abandon the people who matter. Not for logic, not for politics, not for anything." Held his gaze for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone watching. She smiled. "You may be worthy after all, Daniel Carter." Daniel managed a tired laugh before his legs finally gave out beneath him. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was face, looking at him with something that might have been the beginning of love. The alien princess stood firm. Our families chose this union. Part 3. The celebration hall glittered like a box made of starlight. Thousands of crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light across the assembled nobles who had gathered to honor the survivors of the first trial. Daniel stood near the edge of the crowd, wearing a formal suit that the tailors had modified to fit his human frame. He felt out of place among these elegant aliens who moved like dancers and spoke like poets. But he had learned to hide his discomfort behind a mask of calm. Was across the room, surrounded by nobles who offered congratulations with words that dripped with hidden poison. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod before turning back to her admirers. They had agreed to play their parts tonight. Tomorrow would bring the second trial, and they needed all the allies they could find. A soft voice interrupted Daniel's thoughts. "You look lonely, human." He turned to find a woman standing beside him. She was beautiful in the way that all were beautiful, with silver-white hair and eyes like polished amethysts. But there was something calculated in her smile that put Daniel on guard. "I am Lady," she said, extending her hand in the human fashion. "I wanted to offer my congratulations on surviving the first trial. It was quite impressive." Daniel took her hand briefly, nodding the coolness of her skin. "Thank you, lady. It was a team effort." Indeed, though I must say many of us were surprised that the princess needed to be carried at all. She is usually so capable. Eyes glittered with malice hidden beneath courtesy. One might wonder if she was truly injured or if she simply wanted to test your devotion. "Her injury was real," Daniel said flatly. "I saw the poison in her veins." Of course," waved her hand dismissively. "I meant no offense. I simply worry for you, Daniel Carter. You are far from home, surrounded by people who do not want you here. The second trial will be far more dangerous than the first. Perhaps it would be wise to reconsider this arrangement before it is too late." Daniel studied her face, recognizing the manipulation behind her concerned words. She was not trying to help him. She was trying to make him doubt, to drive a wedge between them before the next trial. "I appreciate your concern," he said carefully, "but I made a commitment. I intend to keep it." Smile tightened almost imperceptibly. How noble, how very human. She inclined her head and glided away into the crowd, leaving Daniel with a sense of unease he could not shake. He found in a private corridor behind the main hall. She was arguing with someone, her voice raised in anger. Daniel approached quietly and saw that her opponent was Prince. "You go too far, brother," said, her hands clenched at her sides. "I know it was you who arranged for the desert creature to be released. You nearly killed me." Shrugged, his expression cold. "I did what was necessary to protect our bloodline. If you had died, it would have been a tragedy. But at least you would have died with honor, not bound to some primitive ape." "He is not primitive. He carried me across the desert when any logical being would have left me to die. He saved my life. Which only proves how foolish he is. Stepped closer to his sister, towering over her. Listen to me carefully. If the human survives the second trial, there will be consequences. Accidents can happen at any time. A fall, a malfunction, a simple mistake. No one would question it. His eyes blazed with fury. If you harm him, brother, I will consider it an act of war against Earth, and I will respond accordingly. Laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty corridor. You would go to war over a human. You have truly lost your mind. Perhaps, or perhaps I have finally found it. Turned and saw Daniel standing at the end of the corridor. Her expression softened slightly. Come, Daniel, we should prepare for tomorrow. They walked together through the palace grounds, neither speaking until they reached the gardens where the artificial moonlight cast silver shadows across flowering plants that smelled like honey and rain. You heard, said finally. I heard enough. Your brother wants me dead. He will not succeed. I will protect you. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. I do not need protection. I knew the risks when I agreed to this. What I need is for you to tell me the truth about the second trial. Hesitated, then nodded. The trial of trust. We will enter the underwater caverns beneath the palace. It is completely dark there, darker than anything you have experienced. The priests will establish a temporary psychic link between us. We will have to navigate the caverns together, relying only on our connection to guide us. A psychic link, Daniel frowned. Humans do not have psychic abilities. The link will be created by the priests. It will allow us to share thoughts, memories, emotions. Nothing will be hidden between us. Met his eyes with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. You will see everything I am, Daniel, and I will see everything you are. Many couples have failed this trial because they could not bear to expose themselves so completely to another person. Daniel considered this for a long moment. He thought about the memories he carried, the pain and loss and regret that lived in the corners of his mind. He thought about showing all of that to someone else. Then he looked at this woman who was risking everything to honor a promise her family had made, and he made his decision. I am not afraid of being known, he said quietly. Are you? Stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. The princess who had always seemed so controlled, so perfect, suddenly looked vulnerable. I am terrified, she admitted. I have spent my entire life hiding behind duty and protocol. The thought of someone seeing the real me is more frightening than any creature in the desert. Daniel reached out and took her hand. It was a bold move, perhaps inappropriate given their circumstances, but it felt right. Then we will be terrified together, he said, and we will get through it together. That is what partners do. Looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. You are not what I expected, Daniel Carter. Is that a good thing? I am beginning to think it might be. The next morning, they descended into the underwater caverns. The darkness swallowed them whole, and the psychic link opened like a door in Daniel's mind. Memories flooded between them in a torrent of images and emotions. Saw Daniel's childhood, his grandmother teaching him to survive in the desert. She felt his grief when she died. She experienced his determination to make his short human life matter. Daniel saw's loneliness, a princess surrounded by people but truly known by no one. He felt her desperate desire to be more than a political tool. He understood her growing respect for humanity and her confusion about her feelings for him. They emerged from the caverns hours later, soaking wet and shivering but alive. The trial was complete, but more importantly, they had seen each other truly for the first time. And neither of them looked away. That night, Prince received word that his sister and the human had passed the second trial. He sat alone in his chambers, his fury building to a dangerous peak. He reached for his communicator and called a contact he had hoped never to use. A shadowy figure appeared on the screen, their face hidden in darkness. "The marriage must be stopped," said. "I need your help." The figure nodded slowly. "The Shadow Council agrees. The human alliance threatens everything we have built. We will assist you, Prince, by any means necessary." The communication ended and smiled for the first time in days. The final trial was approaching, and this time there would be no survivors. The alien princess stood firm. Our families chose this union. Part 4. The Temple of Eternal Bond stood at the heart of the capital, a structure so ancient that no one remembered who had built it. Its walls were carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Daniel stood at the entrance, dressed in the ceremonial white robes required for the trial of sacrifice. Beside him, war-matching robes, her silver hair unbound and flowing down her back like liquid moonlight. The past week had changed everything between them. Since the trial of trust, they had spent every possible moment together, talking about their worlds, their hopes, their fears. The psychic link had faded, but its effects lingered. Daniel felt connected to in a way he had never felt connected to anyone before, and he could tell she felt the same. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at the dark entrance before them. What exactly happens in this trial? The trial of sacrifice is symbolic. Each partner must declare what they would give up for the other. The priests evaluate the sincerity of the offerings and determine if the bond is worthy. Paused, a flicker of worry crossing her face. It should be the easiest of the three trials, but something feels wrong today. Daniel had noticed it too. The guards around the temple seemed different than usual, their movements more tense, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd, and there were more of them than there should have been. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "If anything goes wrong, head for the back entrance. I mapped an escape route yesterday." Looked at him with surprise. "You mapped escape routes?" "Old habit from my security days. I like to know my options." Before she could respond, the temple doors opened, and the crowd fell silent. Emperor sat on a ceremonial throne inside the main chamber, surrounded by the high priests and the leaders of the noble houses. Daniel and walked down the central aisle together, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The head priest raised his hands and began the ritual. "We are gathered to witness the trial of sacrifice, the final test of the bond between Princess of House and Daniel Carter of Earth. Let the offerings begin." Stepped forward first. "I offer my position in the line of succession. If Daniel proves unworthy in the eyes of my people, I will renounce my claim to the throne. This I sacrifice for the sake of our union." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was a significant offering, though not unprecedented. The priests nodded their acceptance. Daniel stepped forward next. He had thought long and hard about what to offer. What could a human give that would match a princess renouncing her throne? "I offer he said, and the murmurs turned to gasps of shock. "If I fail in my duties as a partner too, Earth will withdraw from the alliance permanently. We will never seek contact with the Empire again. This I sacrifice for the sake of our union." The chamber erupted in chaos. No one had ever offered something so extreme in the trial of sacrifice. Daniel was essentially betting the future of his entire species on the success of his marriage. Emperor raised his hand for silence. "This is an extraordinary offering. Do you understand the weight of what you propose, human?" Daniel met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. "I do, Your Majesty. I would not offer it if I did not believe completely in the bond between your daughter and myself." The Emperor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Something like respect flickered in his ancient eyes. "The priests will deliberate on the offerings. The trial is—" He never finished the sentence. The doors of the temple burst open, and armed soldiers poured inside. They wore the uniforms of the Imperial Guard, but Daniel recognized the purple sashes across their chests. The Shadow Council's allies. Nobody move. Prince strode into the chamber, a weapon in his hand pointed directly at his father. This farce ends now. The crowd scattered in panic as more soldiers blocked every exit. Daniel grabbed and pulled her behind a stone pillar, his mind racing through options. They were outnumbered and unarmed. The situation looked hopeless. "What is the meaning of this?" Emperor demanded, his voice thundering with authority even as guards surrounded him. "The meaning, father, is that your weakness has endangered our entire civilization. This alliance with the humans is a mistake. This marriage is an abomination, and I will not allow either to continue," gestured to his soldiers. "Arrest the emperor, find the princess and her pet human. If they resist, kill them." Daniel watched the soldiers fan out through the temple. He counted their numbers, noted their positions, identified the gaps in their formation. His training was screaming at him to act, but he needed to wait for the right moment. "Daniel," whispered, her hand gripping his arm, "there are too many. We cannot fight them all." "We do not need to fight them all. We just need to get to your father." "That is impossible. He is surrounded by 20 soldiers." Daniel smiled grimly. Impossible is what humans do best. He waited until the nearest group of soldiers had passed their hiding spot, then moved. He grabbed the trailing soldier from behind, using the man's own momentum to throw him into his companions. In the confusion, Daniel seized a fallen weapon and fired 3 precise shots, disabling 2 more guards before they could react. And now, they ran toward the Emperor's position. Soldiers converged on them from all directions, but Daniel had calculated their response times. He knew exactly how many seconds he had before each group reached them, and he used every single one. Fought beside him with a grace that took his breath away. She was not just a princess, she was a warrior. Together they cut through the enemy lines like a blade through silk. They reached the Emperor just as raised his weapon to fire, threw herself at her brother, knocking him aside. The shot went wild, scorching the ancient stone walls. "Sister, do not do this," snarled, struggling against her. "Join me. Together we can restore the Empire to its former glory." "The only glory you care about is your own," replied. "I will never join you." Daniel engaged the soldiers surrounding the Emperor, buying time for to deal with her brother. He took several hits in the process. Weapons burned like fire, but he kept fighting. He had survived the desert. He had survived the darkness of the caverns. He would survive this. The tide turned when the temple's regular guards finally broke through the barricades. They had remained loyal to the Emperor, and they attacked the Shadow Council's forces with fierce determination. The battle became a chaotic mess of light and sound and violence. In the center of it all and fought a private war. She offered him mercy, begging him to surrender. He refused. He raised his weapon for a killing blow. One of his own soldiers, panicking in the chaos, fired wildly. The shot struck in the chest. He fell, surprise frozen on his face. Brother caught him as he collapsed. Despite everything, there were tears in her eyes. Looked up at her, blood on his lips. "You chose the human over your own blood." "I chose love over hatred," whispered. "I am sorry it had to end this way." His eyes closed, and he did not speak again. The battle ended shortly after. Without their leader, the Shadow Council's forces surrendered. Emperor was freed, shaken but unharmed. Daniel stood among the wreckage of the temple, his body burning with pain from a dozen wounds. A medic approached him, concern evident on her face. "These injuries are severe. Human physiology cannot heal this much damage naturally. We can save you, but the treatment will alter your body permanently. You will no longer be entirely human." Daniel looked across the chamber at who was kneeling beside her brother's body. She looked up and met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw grief and hope and something that might have been love. "Do it," he said. "I am not leaving her now." The medic nodded and called for assistance. As Daniel felt consciousness slipping away, he heard Emperor speak. You saved my life, human. You fought for my daughter. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt. Daniel managed a weak smile. I made a commitment. I intend to keep it. Then darkness claimed him, and he knew nothing more. The alien princess stood firm. Our families chose this union. Part 5. 1 year had passed since the failed coup in the Temple of Eternal Bonds. The scars on the ancient walls had been repaired, but the scars on the Empire ran deeper. Prince was dead, the Shadow Council dismantled, and the relationship between humans and had changed forever. What had begun as a political arrangement had become something far more significant. Daniel Carter stood before a mirror in his chambers, adjusting the ceremonial collar of his wedding attire. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. The medical treatment had saved his life, but it had also transformed him. His eyes now held flecks of violet among the blue. His had been extended to match. He could feel the faint echoes of psychic currents that flowed through society. He was no longer entirely human, but he was still himself. A knock came at the door, and Ambassador Park entered. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, Earth's senior diplomat to the Empire. She had been one of the architects of the original alliance, and she had watched Daniel's journey from the beginning. "You look nervous," she observed with a slight smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who has known you for 20 years. Walked to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the mirror. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you, Daniel. She always said you were destined for great things." Daniel felt a familiar ache at the mention of his grandmother. I wish she could have seen this. "She sees it. Wherever she is, she sees it," placed a hand on his shoulder. "The delegates are assembled. Representatives from 37 worlds have come to witness this ceremony. What happens today will shape galactic politics for centuries." "No pressure, then." Laughed softly. "You carried a princess across a desert, survived underwater caverns, and fought your way through a coup. I think you can handle a wedding." She was right, of course. Daniel had faced death multiple times in the past year. Standing before a crowd and exchanging vows should have felt simple by comparison. But as he walked through the palace corridors toward the grand ceremonial hall, his heart pounded with a nervousness he had never experienced before. The hall was filled with beings from across the known galaxy. Humans stood alongside, their differences suddenly seeming small compared to what united them. Delegates from distant empires watched with curious eyes, eager to see if this unprecedented union would actually take place. Emperor waited at the front of the hall, wearing robes of pure white that signified his role as the officiant of the ceremony. He had become something like a father figure to Daniel over the past year, guiding him through the complexities of culture and politics. And then Daniel saw. She walked down the central aisle, and the entire hall fell silent. Her gown was woven from threads of light itself, shifting through colors that had no names in any human language. Her silver hair was crowned with flowers from both Earth and Prime, a symbol of the two worlds she now represented. But it was her eyes that captured Daniel's attention. Those violet depths held a warmth that was meant for him alone. She reached his side, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. So much had happened since their first meeting in that council chamber. So much had changed. "You look beautiful," Daniel whispered. "You look terrified," replied with a small smile. "I am, but I would not want to be anywhere else." Emperor raised his hands, and the ceremony began. He spoke of the ancient traditions that bound their people together, of the trials that had tested the worth of this union, of the sacrifice and courage that had brought them to this moment. Then it was Ambassador Park's turn to speak. She addressed the assembled delegates with a clarity and passion that reminded everyone why she had been chosen for this role. "Humanity has always sought connection," she said. "From the moment our ancestors first looked up at the stars, we dreamed of finding others who shared our universe. We have not always been wise in our dealings with those we encountered. We have made mistakes. We have caused harm, but we have also learned. We have grown, and today we take another step forward." She looked at Daniel and with evident pride. "This union represents the best of what we can become when we choose understanding over fear, partnership over isolation, love over hatred." When it was turn to speak, her words surprised everyone. "When I was young, I was taught that humans were beneath us, primitive, weak, unworthy of our attention." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled nobles who had once shared those beliefs. "I was wrong. In the past year, I have learned more about strength from this human than I learned in centuries of education." She turned to face Daniel directly, and her voice softened. "You taught me that true strength is not measured in years lived or powers possessed. It is measured in the willingness to stand firm for what matters, to carry someone when they cannot walk, to fight for those you love even when the odds are impossible, to offer everything you are without guarantee of return." A dignitary from a distant empire stood and interrupted. "With respect, Princess, how can a human truly be equal to royalty? Your people have ruled this sector for 50,000 years. His species discovered fire a mere fraction of that time ago." His expression hardened, and when she spoke, her voice rang through the hall like a bell. "Our families chose this union. I chose this partner, and I will stand firm in that choice until the stars themselves grow cold." Silence fell over the assembly. The dignitary sat down without another word. Daniel stepped forward, knowing it was his moment to speak. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the grandmother who had taught him to survive, about the home he had left behind, about the woman standing beside him who had become his entire world. "On Earth, we have a saying, home is not a place, it is the people who make you feel like you belong." He looked then at the Emperor, then at the human delegates who had traveled so far to witness this moment. "For most of my life, I never truly felt like I belonged anywhere. I was always searching for something I could not name. And then I came here, to a world so different from my own that I could barely breathe its air. I faced trials that should have killed me. I fought battles that should have been impossible to win." He reached out and took his hand, feeling the familiar coolness of her skin against his palm. "And I found my home, not on a planet, not in an empire, in her." The ceremony concluded with the formal recognition of Daniel as a prince consort of the empire. Ambassador Park announced a new era of cooperation between Earth and their alien allies. Treaties were signed, hands were shaken, history was made. But for Daniel the politics faded into the background as the celebration continued around them. They stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you regret it?" asked quietly. "Giving up your human, becoming something different?" Daniel considered the question carefully. He thought about everything he had gained and everything he had lost. He thought about the friends on Earth he would outlive, the changes in his body that still sometimes felt strange, the weight of a future that now stretched across centuries instead of decades. Then he looked at this woman who had stood firm against an empire for him, who had chosen him when every voice around her screamed that she was wrong. And he knew his answer. "I gained far more than I gave," he said. "I gained you." Leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. They watched the stars together in comfortable silence, two beings from different worlds who had found in each other something worth any sacrifice. Below them, the celebration continued. Humans danced together for the first time in history. Diplomats who had been enemies found common ground over drinks. A new chapter was beginning for both their peoples. And high above it all, Daniel stood firm together, ready to face whatever the universe would bring them next. Their families had chosen this union, but they had chosen each other. That made all the difference.